Hey guys, it's Mountain Walk, and today we're going to be talking a little bit about top 10 5 drops. That's right, going to be talking about the 5 drop creatures that are the sweetest ones, or the most powerful ones, or most ubiquitous ones, or whatnot. And like I said, everything from about like 4 and 5 and 6 drop creatures, the I think there's a lot less consensus, and I think the metrics for judging these cards is just it's a lot more difficult. These kind of creatures are tending to be more siloed, more specialized. So, like I said, they're not really ubiquitous for the most part. And then also, again, you sort of get the problem of like a lot of these things are cheated out, you know? So it's like, I'm sure people will be like, you're not actually casting this on turn five, you know. So the most powerful, some of the most powerful creatures that are 5 mana, a lot of them aren't even cast or they're cheating the play or whatnot, you know. So, and this only gets more and more true the further up you go with mana cost, you know, like 7 drops, like how many of those are actually cast fairly, right? So yeah. So let's get on with it. Let's do it. Without further ado, let's get to our honorable mentions. All right. So we got a lot of sweet cards here. Um, some of these can be are a little sketchy, but these are just honorable mentions. These are cards I thought were pretty sweet. For example, first we got Morphling. Morphling is back in the day used to be known as Superman. This was with you had damage on the stack. Oftentimes you had Force of Will to protect it, and in places like Vintage where you had Moxen to accelerate it out. So having like a ton of keywords and be able to protect itself and be like a 4 turn clock, and then also untap and block, and also not die to like any number of burn spells or removal spells or anything. This was really strong, you know, back then. But especially now these days, everything's so much faster. And for example, something like Vintage has moved past Morphling like about 17 years ago, 18 years ago, something like that. Yeah, Morphling hasn't been very good in a very long time. But it was sweet. It was sweet back in the day. It did a lot of sweet stuff, you know. Um, but yeah, not so much anymore. You know, definitely a lot worse, and basically sees no play anywhere. So we got Spiritmonger again, same thing. Another really powerful creature that was printed 2 decades ago or whatever. Really strong when it came out. Definitely looked really impressive. Like say if you saw something like like say Questing Beast, recently spoiled card from Throne of Eldraine, you'd look at Spiritmonger and it's like same sort of reaction. You're like, oh my gosh, look at all these abilities. How you even kill this thing? It's 5 mana 6/6. Wow, look at this sweet art. Um, at least the art has aged very well. It's a very sweet card, so that's always nice. So yeah, used to be pretty strong. Not so much anymore. Then we got Teferi. Saw a bunch of play in a standard at the time, and then I think it saw a little bit of modern play too a while ago, years ago. Uh, Pretty strong, definitely pretty sweet creature. Definitely warps the game around it, but definitely a little bit weaker, a little bit weaker. Then we got Arrogant Worm. This used to be really big game, big game back in the day. I could have seen it making it on the list since it was so important back in the day in standard and extended, and then also legacy and vintage and stuff. Um, Maybe it should have been on, but like I said, again, it's just hard to judge these things sort of objectively. But of course, Arrogant Worm, basically the big old payoff for your Madness decks, discarding it on turn 3 to your Wild Mongrel, pump your Mongrel, Madness this guy out. Uh, it's even better when it has Flying with Wonder. Oh man, it was a pretty sweet card, pretty sweet. Most recently saw played, to best of my knowledge, in the Blue-Green Madness Survival decks, back before Survival got banned in about 2010, 2011, something like that. And also next up we got another one, another really powerful one. Um, and this guy is uh, pretty sweet, pretty sweet. We got Hollow One. This was a pretty powerful modern deck, not so much anymore. due to bannings and meta changes and just how the Hollow One deck itself was just so random. This guy is really sweet, shows up a lot there, and then also in Vintage he's seen quite a bit of play. Uh, Obviously he's pretty good with the Bazaar of Baghdad, and then also in the survival decks, and then which are again kind of one the same, and then also the Dredge Bazaar decks. A lot of times they'll play Hollow One either in the main board or sideboard as a way to dodge graveyard hate because you can just activate Bazaar once, discard a trillion things, and then you start spamming free Hollow Ones. That's pretty sweet. So this card's pretty awesome, definitely pretty strong. Does a lot of good stuff. Um, but yeah, let's go ahead and let's get on to the list. All right, number 10. You're probably thinking, what the hell is Acidic Slime doing on here? I was trying to look through as many different formats as I could, and a lot of these, some of these creatures at 5 mana are actually kind of biased towards EDH. So Acidic Slime is one of the most played creatures in the entire format, according to EDH Rec. Is it EDH Rec or EDH REC? I don't know. I guess REC is in record. Anyways, uh, this guy is sweet. I mean, he does it all. 5 mana 2/2 Death Touch, so he kills just pretty much anything. So he's good to recur or blink because of his ability, where he comes into play, destroys an artifact, enchantment, or land. So this is great. So it's cheap land kill, being able to take out like um, Volrath Stronghold, Academy Ruins, things like that, Mazabith, Dark Depths, Thespian Stage, all sorts of stuff. So it's pretty sweet there. Can kill all sorts of nasty artifacts and enchantments, and you can trade with stuff. So he's, almost always gets a 2-for-1, or he just acts like a moat so people don't attack you. Nice Rattlesnake card. So I figure, oh, this guy, one of the most played cards in Commander. I think that's probably good enough. And he's awesome play in Standard, if I recall correctly. And it's a pretty sweet card. Hasn't seen a lot of work in other places, to the best of my knowledge. Not like other oozes, like Scavenging Ooze, but pretty sweet card nonetheless. Um, and not much else to say about him. Sweet card. I like casting it. Pretty much play it in most of my Commander decks. I think he's pretty awesome. Alright, now we got Siege Gang Commander. This guy is actually pretty sweet, and when I started looking into it, looking at all the different 5 drops, I was like, oh yeah, this guy exists. And he saw a lot of play when he was first printed in Scourge. But not only that, he's been reprinted a couple more times. I believe one of them was like 10th edition and then like M10 or something like that. And each time he was reprinted, he actually saw play in Standard, like I believe like in the Jund decks, oftentimes he was used as a top end. He was reprinted in Dominaria. He was used in some of the uh, God Throne of the God Pharaoh, the one where it's like you get creatures back and you can sack them. So like they would sack this guy to Skirk Prospector and stuff, and like do all sorts of funny tricks. Um, God, I can't remember. I don't remember the name of the card, but this guy's seen a lot of play. Obviously, still occasionally sees some play in the Goblin decks because of he's a good top end. He's got some competition now with Sling Gang Lieutenant because he's cheaper and doesn't require any mana to activate, and of course the Life Swing's very good. Although I still like one copy of Siege Gang just because it's a little better on some boards and deals more damage in the late game. But very powerful card. Actually sees quite a bit of play in Standard whenever it's there. And then also saw some play, in Extended in the Goblin decks and so on and so forth. She has a pretty big pedigree. Of course, sees play in the Goblin decks, of course, and Commander, always sweet there. So pretty much, I think he's seen play in every format, although not recently in some of them, like Vintage, for example. But pretty sweet card. Everyone likes it. What a sweet art! Like I think this is the best art, the original Scourge art. So you can't go wrong there. But let's get on to number 8. All right, now we got another keyword soup creature. I think M10 was sort of around M10, M11 when you really started having like really, really powerful like creatures like power creep and stuff. And this thing is pretty sweet when I first saw it. Not only does it have that sweet Greg Staples art, but this thing 5 mana 5/5, so it's already correctly statted, and then like 3 good abilities: flying, first strike, lifelink, and then also the trinket text of protection from demons and dragons. Although oftentimes there are demons and dragons like in the format. Like if you're playing Commander, obviously it's not trinket text. It's actually very good. Um, but yeah, this is definitely a card that sees a lot of play. Sometimes will come out the sideboard of like blue-white control decks to be like the Angel Gambit kind of thing. Although nowadays they're relying a lot more on Monastery Mentor and a lot of other formats. But this card is sweet. This card saw a lot of play every time it was printed, and it's really awesome. I mean, shoot, you can't really get much better than this for like angels, like really well statted, really powerful, and just the life link is off. It's so good, and it's hard to block, hard to kill in combat. So it's pretty sweet. Not much else to say. This card is pretty rad. All right, now we got going from a sweet card to a super obnoxious card. Scarab God was pretty annoying to deal with in Amonkhet when it was in Standard. This thing is like definitely one of those development cards. It's like, okay, it's a 5 mana 5/5, and then it has like 8 abilities on it or something. So yeah, it makes your opponent lose life, and then you scry, and then you can exile creatures from graveyard, so it's like even a little bit of pseudo graveyard hate to make a 4/4 guy, and then like even if you kill it, it goes back to the owner's hand. So it's just like this thing just does everything, and definitely a really annoying card. And it sees a lot of play in Commander as like say a commander of like a blue-black zombie deck. Really powerful there. Actually sees quite a bit of play in Commander too. So this thing is sweet. It's a lot more fun in Commander, I think, versus like its time in Standard where it was a little bit warping, and definitely not a lot of fun. Definitely remember a lot of complaints from that. But this card's pretty sweet. Definitely pretty spooky guy. Look at all those zombies around him. That's pretty spooky. That's pretty spooky. So yeah, this guy's pretty sweet. Definitely strong enough to earn him spot at number 7. So let's go to number 6. All right, talk about obnoxious cards to deal with. This thing was tough. This thing is just like Thragtusk was just impossible to deal with. It felt like equitably, because if you try and kill it, you get the beast, and then it comes into play. They gain 5 life, so it's not even like you can try and race them. And then like when you throw in all sorts of blink and reanimating shenanigans, like in Commander or something like that, um, it definitely is pretty silly. Pretty silly. Definitely see some play in Modern. I believe the green Tron decks will play it in the sideboard as another hedge against some of the faster aggressive decks. And this card's just good against pretty much everything. Like even control decks, it's not too bad if you can just get the thing to resolve. Because even if they kill it, you still get a beast. So this thing is sweet. Definitely really powerful in Standard when this thing was around. You gained just tons and tons of life. Really clogged up the battlefield. It was pretty silly. Felt like playing Commander in some respects. Thragtusk was really sweet. Uh, and man, look at that art. That's pretty sweet art too. So yeah, not much to say about this guy. He was pretty obnoxious. I guess that's kind of like a lot of the theme for some of these cards. It's just these were not fun in Standard at the time, or they were just like really pushed and caused all sorts of issues. But I like Thragtusk anyways. It's a pretty sweet card. All right, talking about sweet cards. Holy crap! Look at this thing. This is Value City. It's freaking either a divination or a 5 mana 2/2 flyer like double card pop. Like Muldrifter is sweet. This is definitely one of the more surprising cards when I was looking around. I was like, oh yeah, this is a 5 mana card too. But it's actually, you wouldn't believe it, but it's actually the most played creature in Pauper at the moment. Although Core Skyfisher's getting pretty close, Um, yeah, this guy is sweet. Saw a ton of play in Standard in the Cruel control decks. It's a sweet card. I love it in Commander. I play a ton of it in Commander because, again, all the blinking, reanimating, graveyard stuff, shenanigans, and it's just a decent chump blocker. Um, so it just does everything. And look at that cute face on that little fish. It's got this vacant stare. I mean, you can't lose. And it's an elemental, so all the newly printed elemental stuff for like the Omnath decks. That'd be pretty fun. So yeah, this guy is pretty sweet, pretty fun. Um, definitely a sweet card. All right, so yeah, this guy. Yeah, yeah, this guy, fucking Reality Smasher. So I'm pretty sure everyone looks at this guy and just remembers how fun he was in Modern for what was it, like a month or two or something? A couple months? Yeah, that those Eldrazi decks were pretty ridiculous. Like this card was fine in Standard, him and Thought-Knot but he did a lot of work once you could play Eye of Ugin and Eldrazi Temple. And Simian Spirit Guy, when it doesn't cost 5 but more like 3, card's a little silly. This thing is sweet. Again, it's hard to deal with. You can't deal with it like on a one-for-one basis, which is kind of like a common theme among a lot of these cards because they're so expensive. The tempo loss from having it removed or whatever is not fun and can be devastating. So even if they try and like terminate or plow it or whatever removal spell, they actually have to discard a card. So it's a 2-for-1, which is pretty nice. It has haste and trample, so it's hard to block effectively. And yeah, this thing is sweet. Having the haste is actually really nice for like taking down like planeswalkers and stuff, or of course, just beating your opponent in the face. This thing is pretty dumb. As seen play, and pretty much like the older the format is, the more sets available, the more ridiculous these cards get. In Legacy, you're casting your turn one Chalice into your turn two Thought-Knots, and then jamming Reality Smasher on third turn and just dealing absurd amount of damage. Like it's a pretty silly, pretty push card. Definitely not one that's cost 5 mana. Doesn't exactly cost 5 mana. More like 3 basically. Yeah, this thing is nuts. So yeah, cool. I don't think anyone's too surprised by that. So let's move on to number 3. Yeah, so this guy was also another card I forgot was actually 5 mana. But you actually sometimes do cast this card occasionally, but most of the time it sees play in the Death Shadow decks. Really great there. Makes the deck like 56 cards, and then, the cycling paying life obviously plays into the theme of just losing a bunch of life, so your Death Shadows are huge. And in Legacy, when you play like the Death Shadow decks, which are pretty good there, uh, you can like first turn you can cycle it off your shock land that you fetched on the first turn, and then you can reanimate this guy. And so it's like you lose like an 8 or 9 life or something ridiculous like that. It's pretty sweet being able to use reanimate on this guy. Is awesome. It's like, oh man, because like a first turn 3/4 like pseudo evasion guy is actually not too bad, especially when it plays into your plan of like just tearing through your deck, losing a bunch of life, making your Death Shadows big. And that's, of course, that's not the only place it sees play. Not just the Modern and Legacy Death Shadow decks, but also all of the Dredge variants play them too, because again, it's free cycling, which is a free draw trigger, which is a free Dredge trigger. So yeah, pretty sweet there too. And of course, he pitches. Well, I guess it's he, Mr. Wraith, Mrs. Wraith. I don't know. Pretty spooky. Street Wraith pitches to Ichorid. So even there, it's really good too. So pretty nice. Card does a lot of good stuff, and it only really sees played kind of silly decks, but it's a sweet card. It's a sweet card. I like it. I like the art too. Pretty spooky. But let's get on to number 2. Yeah, look at this guy. Man, this guy has seen play in a ton of different decks. I mean, a ton of different decks. Well, let's see. Let me count the ways. So in Standard, when it first came out in Champions, it was played in the Tooth and Nail decks, That was interesting. So you could copy like your Darksteel Colossus. That's like a two-turn clock. And there was like I don't really remember there being a lot of removal for it. So like if you got your Darksteel Colossus out and made your token, I mean bam, they were basically dead next turn. So that was pretty sweet. He's seen tons of play in like modern, obviously, in a lot of the decks, like some of the Birthing Pod decks or Splinter Twin. Pretty sure it was played in Birthing Pod if I remember correctly. Of course, neither of those decks really exist anymore, unfortunately, but it's very good there. This guy saw quite a bit of play, or well, a little bit of play in some of the Goblin decks. They'd play him because this guy copying Ringleader or even just something like Pile Driver or whatever was really powerful. Just being able to get like a lot of extra dudes out, pretty strong there. I mean, this card has done a lot of work. Done a lot of work. Sometimes he's, in Commander, of course, he does a lot of work. Sometimes he's part of like just, infinite combos. Sometimes he's just a value guy. He does a lot. I mean, his card is pretty awesome. Pretty awesome. The only hard part is like the triple red mana I've always found kind of annoying. I'm just like, oh man, I really want to cast my Kiki Jiki this turn, but I only have double red. But other than that, this card is total gas, total gas. I love it. And it's a silly looking card. I'm not exactly sure what's going on. I guess he's copying a dragon in the art. I don't know. I don't know. But it's got Pete Venters. Everyone likes Pete Venters. So yeah, this card is pretty sweet. Definitely really powerful. Definitely sees a lot of play in a lot of different places. And it's still sees quite a bit of play. So yeah, I think that's definitely enough to put this guy at number two. But I think there's actually something a little bit better than Kiki Cheeky. Yeah, that's right. This guy. Friggin' Golgari Grave Troll. So this thing has caused all sorts of problems basically ever since it was printed, either in extended or in modern, where it was banned and then unbanned and then had to be rebanned like a year or so later. Um, Obviously in Legacy, this is in the Dredge decks, and then of course in Vintage, it's also in the Dredge decks, and it was just recently restricted in Vintage. Those Dredge decks were just ridiculous, definitely one of the most oppressive decks because you often needed like 6 to 7 pieces of graveyard hate to even have a game against them, and you always, pretty much always, just auto lost the first game. So it's just ridiculous. Like the Dredge decks in Vintage were basically one card combo decks. So you played your 4 Bazaar, your 4 Serum Powder, and now you have the London Mulligan. So it was just like just too much. I mean, they were already like super duper likely to get their Bazaar on the first turn, anyways, like 80+% or whatever. So it's just obscene. So they're like, all right, let's nerf the deck. At least make it more difficult for him to support Force of Vigor. Obviously, Grave Troll is the most egregious card. This thing has just been broken from day one in the Dredge decks. About the only place he's ever been seen play in, but like I said, every deck that's played Dredge cards, um, every format that's had Dredge cards has played this guy, and the deck's always been very good, whether it was extended, modern, legacy, or vintage. Pretty nuts. Obviously enough to earn bannings and restrictions and stuff. And I've actually you actually have him as a dread return target because sometimes you just don't find your one of like Ashen Rider or something or whatever, your Iona or your Elish Norn, something like that. So you'll just dread return a Grave Troll with like 12 counters on it and beat him down that way, which is always kind of sweet. Yeah, this guy does a lot of work. I mean, I guess shoot, you can even regenerate him. Although I can't even remember the when I did like Dread Return of Golgari Grave Troll if I've ever needed to regenerate. Usually I've ripped their hand apart with Cabal Therapy, but I mean, I guess that's a thing it could do. A thing it could do. Yeah, this card is pretty degenerate, pretty ridiculous. I don't think I've ever hardcast him, but he has been in play with me a couple times due to Dread Return. So there's that, right? Yeah, there's probably no other 5 mana creature that's even quite as broken as this guy, and one that rarely ever gets cast. It's basically just the text box is all that matters, not so much the power and toughness. But yeah, that's kind of a running theme with all of these things. Like just getting cheated out, or you don't even use them, you just want the characteristics of the card, not even the fact that it's a creature. But regardless, nevertheless, this thing's done a lot of work, and it's definitely been broken repeatedly over and over. So I think it earns its spot at number one. So yeah, this is the best 5 mana creature. I think the rest of the list is kind of hard to sort of figure out where things fall. I think I got pretty much all of the good 5 mana creatures. But yeah, this one's clearly like the most broken, the most powerful, the most ubiquitous, basically. So yeah, yeah, this card is pretty sweet. So I don't think anyone can disagree with that. All right, guys. So that's it. Thanks for stopping by today. Thanks for listening to me. I hope you have a nice day, and have a nice day.